Federalist 27, Part 3. The plan reported by the Convention, by extending the authority of the federal head to the individual citizens of the several states, will enable the government to employ the ordinary magistracy of each in the execution of its laws. So see, he says, with this new constitution, we can apply the laws towards the citizens of different states. And when that is the case, in case there's a dispute, in case there's a misunderstanding, in case somebody breaks the law, you can always take them to court and let the court decide. Because as we said in the last part, if there are no courts involved, if you have to constantly go to the state and ask the state to enforce the law, the states are going to be either late in doing it or not at all, and then that will lead to war. Whereas here, you can have the court system involved. And then he'll continue to say, it is easy to perceive that this will tend to destroy, in the common apprehension, all distinctions between the sources from which they might proceed, and will give the federal government the same advantage for securing a due obedience to its authority, which is enjoyed by the government of each state. In addition to influence on public opinion, which will result from the important consideration of its having power to call to its assistance and support the resources of the whole Union. It merits particular attention in this place that the laws of confederacy, as to the enumerated and legitimate objects of its jurisdiction, will become the supreme law of the land, to the observance of which all officers, legislative, executive, and judicial in each state will be bound by the sanctity of an oath. Thus the legislature, courts, magistrates of the respective members will be incorporated into the operations of the national government as far as its just and constitutional authority extends, and will be rendered auxiliary to the enforcement of its laws. Any man who will pursue by his own reflections the consequence of this situation will perceive that there is good ground to calculate upon a regular and peaceable execution of the laws of the Union, if its powers are administered with a common share of prudence. If we will arbitrarily suppose the contrary, we may deduce any inferences we please from the supposition, for it is certainly possible, by an injudicious exercise of the authorities of the best government that ever was or even can be instituted, to provoke and precipitate the people into the wildest excesses. But though the adversaries of the proposed constitution should presume that the national rulers would be insensible to the motives of public good or to the obligations of duty, I would still ask them how the interests of ambition or the views of encroachment can be promoted by such a conduct. Okay, there is a footnote that Hamilton has in this last paragraph, and the footnote says, the sophistry which has been employed to show that this will tend to the destruction of the state governments will, in its proper place, be fully detected. Hamilton says in one of the next Federalist Papers, we will talk about this sophistry, this wrong thinking, this imaginary but wrong-headed thinking of the people who are saying that we're going to do away with the state governments, that the state governments will not count at all. He says we will deal with this in another Federalist. Because like I said, remember, as they're writing these papers, the anti-Federalists or people who oppose this Constitution are constantly writing in the papers and criticizing what this new Constitution will be doing. And so they have to both, in writing the Federalist, they have to both explain the federal system, explain the Constitution that came out of the Philadelphia Convention, and at the same time answer the critics that are writing in the newspapers of the day. So this last paragraph, remember he says that the way we have written this Constitution, all the people that serve you in the states, in any capacity, whether they are in legislatures, whether they are part of the judiciary, part of the system that where the judges are, or even the executive branch, all of them have to take an oath to the Constitution of the United States to defend it. So that will create a uniformity that people will actually pay closer attention to what they're doing, so that and remember that their loyalty is not to their boss or to their state representatives or to whoever, but their loyalty should be to the supreme law of the land. And that would be not necessarily loyalty, but they have to consider the supreme law of the land as the supreme law of the land, the basic law that everything else has to be compared to. And he says that this will give a uniformity all through the states. In other words, gradually people will realize that we have one supreme law and we have to act accordingly. We have to devise our laws in a way in the states that will not violate the supreme law of the land. Because as you've noticed, when Americans take an oath, they take an oath to defend and support the Constitution. They don't take an oath to hold the president in a high place or keep the judges, I don't know, they're not forced to follow people, but to respect the supreme law of the land. That's the highest authority because it comes from the people. Remember, Americans, by asking the Constitution that came out of the Philadelphia Convention to be sent to special ratifying conventions and not to the legislatures, they made this the supreme law of the land for all of Americans, not for part of Americans. So this ratification process and the writing of the Federalist Papers is very important for us to learn about how you can write a constitution that will be respected by all the people. It's got to be a constitution that will be sent to them to be ratified, to people themselves, not to their representatives or not to their parliaments or not to their city council, but to people themselves. People themselves elect delegates to go to a special convention. And in these special conventions, they will deliberate, they will think deeply about what the Constitution is, the pluses, the minuses, then they will vote on that. And this way you can actually say it's the supreme law of the land. So as we go forward and read these Federalist Papers, just keep in mind that they are writing it to help ratify it first in the state of New York and then in the other states. And this ratification process is what makes the Constitution the supreme law of the land.